So a while back I made a video about overrated units according to a Reddit thread where I discussed some units and people's perceptions of those units all over the series. That got a lot of comments, and one comment in particular had a line that got me thinking, and that's the reason this video exists. The context is talking about Shadows of Valentia, specifically about how the SOV metagame has shifted away from focusing experience, stat boosters, and other resources into one character instead of another, in this case from Palla to Leon. And since the discussion gave me the itch to play SOV again, and because I think you all want something more exciting in the background than just the YouTube comments, here's some SOV background footage. But the specifics of Palla and Leon and the SOV metagame aren't really the main point of today's video. If you are interested in those, my SOV playthrough with Bismix follows the Palla formula, and in my tier list review I discuss Leon, Palla, and every other unit very in depth with a very knowledgeable player of that game, and in the background footage I focus on Leon. But what I want to do today is talk about this specific line. The term meta is pointless because there is no objectively correct way to play the game, so the meta changing means nothing. I do not care what people think on the internet is the most optimal way to play the game. Now, I find this line of thinking genuinely fascinating. I've actually had a similar thought before, and it comes up to me, especially if someone calls it the SOV meta. I think, first of all, just the term meta alone evokes a bit of an emotional response in a lot of people. It's really different from when someone uses a phrase like the recommended strategy, or what I usually do is the following, or even just a good strategy. From what I know, the term meta isn't commonly used for single-player games, and instead you mostly see it in discussions about competitive multiplayer games. If the metagame of rock, paper, scissors is that a lot of people are playing rock, then the anti-meta is picking paper, and if picking paper becomes common enough, then the scissors players might come out to beat those, and it just kind of repeats like that. That is nothing like what happens with Fire Emblem gameplay discussions. In Fire Emblem, what everyone else thinks does not change what happens in your game at all, and in that sense, the comment is right in that the term meta is pointless. But I do think that if you want to get better at Fire Emblem, or if you enjoy looking at the series from an analytical perspective like I do, it is worth paying attention to what the meta is. For a single player game like this, the meta isn't exactly a way to get ahead of the rest of the player base, but rather, it's an increasing understanding of what strategies work better than others. This is what has led a lot of people to look more favorably at, for example, Jagan characters, not seeing them as XP thieves, but instead as some of the best units in the series. It's why we make jokes about Ike versus Kirin, even though Ike is Punich incarnate. These kinds of leaps in knowledge happened all the time, and while most of the games have been explored so much by now that it's more rare, there are still disagreements among players about what is good and what isn't, or at least what is less good. A more recent example would be the Vake versus Ramen debate. I'm not saying I'm 100% confident that Vake is better, but I am saying that whenever the topic comes up, a lot of people are giving Robin a level of slack that reminds me of the Ike is Punich incarnate debate. And a couple years into the future, we might look at it differently than we do now. The point is, even though the game itself is not changing, and even though people are not playing against each other, there is still a metagame in the sense that different strategies are considered different levels of good at different times. Even though Leon and Palla have the exact same parameters as they did when SOV first came out, a lot of players look at them differently now. The strategies that center on Palla still work just as well, but I honestly prefer Leon as a carry, both for casual playthroughs as well as those trying to get a low turn count. Anyway, that got me thinking about the way people talk about meta strategies. This doesn't have a whole lot to do with what the comment was saying, and I'm not saying that that commenter specifically has this attitude, but it is closely adjacent to what I was already talking about. I've noticed that there are some players who will just outright refuse to use what is considered meta because it's meta. The funniest example I know is once when I was browsing Reddit long ago, I have seen someone so spitefully saying that they refuse to use mounted units for this reason. Like, can you believe that? I know I don't have the proof of it because it was so long ago and I didn't think to screen cap it at the time, but can you believe that? Someone benched their mounted units to spite their least favorite YouTuber. It's amazing. Now, this line of thinking is over the top, but On some level, I understand the sentiments. I also try to spice up my playthroughs of Fire Emblem because if I don't, I tend to fall into the same patterns, using the same units with the same weapons and the same plans for each chapter. That's boring. So I will bench some units that I know are good, and in exchange, I will bring some units that I haven't used before, and I feel like that's perfectly normal. But not using certain units or strategies just because other people are using those, or because lots of people are saying those units or strategies are the best, that's a special level of stubborn. Why do some people feel the desire to go against the grain like this? I've had a long think about this, and I've thought of a couple reasons why. First reason is self-expression. People see their choices in these games as a way to express themselves creatively. Their teams are a reflection of their preferences with regards to strategies, characters, weapons, and so on. So if they learn of what other people are doing, they might lean towards less common choices, because after all, if your team looks like everyone else's, you don't really feel like you're expressing yourself anymore, you're just part of a crowd. So the more unique your choice, the more your team feels like your team and not anyone else's. Now just to make it clear, I don't know of anyone who has explicitly said that this is their primary reasoning for how they pick units. It might be an unconscious process, and that goes for all these reasons. And also, the reasons are not mutually exclusive. There could be multiple things going on in people's heads. That said, reason 2, agency. Some people might feel like some of their agency in making choices is lost if they simply go with what other people have already determined what is the best strategy, because they want to figure out the game for themselves. Makes a lot of sense, by the way. Fire Emblem is a strategy RPG, and if someone else did the strategizing for you, that can take away some of the fun of it. This is pretty close to how I view any game I play for the first time. I try to look at every unit, every weapon, and every mechanic in the game itself, and I'm explicitly not looking for advice on which to pick on the internet or in my comment section. I just want to experiment. If I want to know something, I will ask. So I imagine the anti-meta sentiment comes in when someone gets advice that they didn't want, maybe by accident, and then they feel an urge to not do as they're told, to do the opposite. Now, I swear the following analogy is not to make these people look like a child, but it does remind me of how a kid has to do some kind of chore like tidying their room, and they're going to, but then their parent tells them to do that chore and they feel less like doing it. Now, their room didn't get messier since they were told to tidy it, and the advice to tell them to do something good didn't make doing that thing worse, but they're less inclined to do it because now it feels worse to do it, and I totally get that. Reason 3 is familiarity and practical experience. If someone has beaten one of the easier games like Shadows of Valentia, then they know from witnessing it firsthand that what they do works. It got the job done. So whatever strategy people online have concocted is theoretical. It might work, it might not, but they know that their own strategy does. So if they beat Fire Emblem Sacred Stones using General Amelia, and some guy online makes a video saying she's not good in general, they can come into my comment section and say, well, she was good in my game actually, all her stats are high, she killed everything and never died. And they might even make up reasons to justify their position in hindsight, like the fact that there's more paladins and generals in the game. I've tried arguing against this exact point, but I feel like once someone has decided on what they think is good and what isn't, they are rarely open-minded enough to change their stance on it. Just look at the comments of like any Amelia related video I've ever made. And yeah, just to make it clear, General Amelia works. She works in the sense that she can kill enemies and not die, and that is sufficient for every casual playthrough. If it was so bad that it did not let you beat the game, we would have seen it by now, and then we would have YouTube videos titled, "Can you beat Fire Emblem 8 using only General Amelia?" But we don't, because it would just be a fairly easy but slow training montage, followed by a lot of enemies dying to javelins and hand axes. When I say Amelia is bad in general, I don't mean she's so bad that she cannot be used, I just mean that she is worse than the many alternatives you have. But if you have beaten the game with just that one strategy, you don't know how good the alternatives are. But you do know someone told you Amelia is not the meta, and you might feel inclined to prove otherwise. The fourth reason is suspicion. They say this, but that seems too good to be true, so just to be safe, I'm gonna do it my way. Some units in Fire Emblem are just so good that it defies belief. Some pre-promotes are so good that they dwarf their underleveled counterparts. Surely the developers wouldn't design the game that way, right? So there's got to be a catch to this pre-promote. Or there's got to be a reason to level up this really underleveled unit. Or there's got to be a reason to use archers in GBA, even though mages are just better all around. Stuff like that. And just like I've said before, if people really want to justify their choices after making them, there are plenty of ways for them to do it. And if the game is easy enough, the fact that their choices led them to beat the game will help affirm their beliefs. Reason 5 is a reverse. Wanting to be the underdog. Wanting to use something suboptimal to prove a point. These are people saying, I'm good enough at the game to use characters and strategies that are considered bad. Note that this has an inherent acknowledgement of the fact that their strategies are suboptimal. This is different from the people who deny that meta strategies are good. This is basically just people doing challenge playthroughs. For the most part, I think these reasons are just human nature. Despite what some people might think, I don't think worse of people who play differently than me or differently than optimal. At worst, I don't care, and at best, I will try to peer into their minds to see what they're thinking, like I'm doing in this video. I might even poke light fun at them, but I never try to make it personal. I've been on the other side of this before, trying to argue Marcus is not good because he steals experience. I do think when these people start giving advice to players that are new to the series that it's fair to provide a more experienced perspective, but I try to never be like, this guy's wrong, Marcus is the best and you should use him to kill everything. It's usually more nuanced, like Marcus is a lot stronger than your other units, so it's a good idea to use him to remove troublesome enemies. Just don't solo the game with him and make sure to train some other units and you'll be fine. I don't think there's even much of a point in trying to sell people on all the best meta strats if they're new to a game. They can explore that on a replay if they feel like it. If people online ask for advice on a Fire Emblem game, it's usually either because they're on their first playthrough and they're trying to not get blindsided, or they got stuck and they're looking for tips on how to get past a single roadblock. For either of these situations, I think it's best to give them as little information as possible so they can do as much discovering of their own as they want to. They always have the option of asking for more advice if they feel like it. Meta strats are for people who are curious about meta strats. For everyone else, these strats simply aren't what they need, and as we've discussed, every now and then it seems to cause more friction than smoothness. That said, I am sure that people who have the strongest reactions to these strategies, one way or the other, are a loud minority, and most people's reactions to some strategies being better or more common than other strategies is a simple fact of life to shrug their shoulders at. So, what do you think causes people to get annoyed by metagame strats? Am I on the mark with my presumed reasons why, or is there something I missed? Let me know down below.